Hi, and welcome to another episode of Composed Living with Elsa Elbert. I am your host, Elsa, and today my guest is Brandy Searcy. She's a pharmaceutical research scientist turned hormone mythbuster, nervous system whisperer, and founder of both Reclaim Wellness and Rain Organica, where skincare becomes a mindful ritual. Brandy helps women unravel the feedback loops between stress, inflammation, and hormones, guiding them out of survival mode and back into deep connection with their bodies. Her two brands reflect that mission. Reclaim Wellness is a lifeline for women with invisible illnesses, and Rain Organica provides a clean skincare routine simplified into ritual. Whether you're healing from autoimmunity, reclaiming your energy, or simply ready for skin that glows without makeup, Brandy offers science rooted tools and reverent rituals that reconnect you to you. How beautiful is that? And welcome. Thanks for being my guest today.
Thank you so much for having me, Elsa.
Of course. So we were introduced from a mutual friend, Krista. She was a podcast last week, or a guest on the podcast last week. And she, I think, originally connected us because of your Rain Organica line, which is so beautiful and all natural ingredients. And so we actually carry a few of your products in our retail store, and I use them personally. I'm a big fan of like only selling in the store things that I actively use myself. And so I love having, especially the face mist. Every time I walk by, I give myself a little spritz. But tell us a little bit about yourself. That's so much that you're doing right now. There's also so much that I know you're currently doing that was not even included in that bio, like the spinal flow stuff. So I would love for you to share a little bit about your journey into starting these two businesses so that our listeners can get to know you a little better.
And Elsa, I love that you are so authentic and really using basically composed living vibrates what you are doing personally, which is absolutely beautiful. And also ties in, I feel like, a lot to my own story. Basically, I was one of those kids who was sick as a kid, had lots of health issues, asthma growing up, GI disturbances, all of the things. Moved into my teens and started struggling with acne. And my mom, being the good mother that she is and very Western medicine minded, took me to every dermatologist across South Georgia to try to help my face look better. And for anyone out there who has had acne, has struggled with acne, it, or has a teen that's going through it right now, really, as first world as this is made out to be, oftentimes like a first world problem, the fact of the matter is it takes such a toll on self-confidence. It takes such a toll on, especially for type A people out there. This is something we have absolutely no ability to control. And moving through that, I can still very much get in touch with my teenage mindset of what that felt like. And this was decades in unfolding, actually, what the acne even revealed about the state of my health, what it even revealed about my path and where I needed to go along it. Still being very entrenched in that Western mindset, and wound up on a course of Accutane. And during that first round of Accutane, I started experiencing symptoms that in the grand scheme of things were not life-threatening or not some of the horror stories that you hear with Accutane, but they were scary enough for me to stop mid-course and basically do a 180 with my approach to skincare. I distinctly remember waking up one morning, I had green poo. I was like, okay, we are done with this. And I decided from then on, I was going to treat my skin like an organ to be loved rather than a canvas to wage war on. This was way back in the early 2000s, before smartphones were even a thing, back when we still had dial-up internet. So it was a major feat to figure out. I can still remember spending about half a day at a Whole Foods store, going down the road, picking up skincare container after skincare container and looking at the ingredients list and setting each and every one of them back on the shelf because the ingredients were not clean enough. I did not trust those ingredients. And then what happened, I kind of limped along using as good as I could find for a few years until I figured out the world of formulation development existed. And formulation development, it's still to this day not something that you can get a degree in at very many colleges throughout the US. And yet there's this whole, it opens up such a door into the career space because you've got formulation development scientists making different formulas for Coca-Cola, for instance, or major pesticide companies, which is where I landed to begin with, was working for a pesticide company and then learning the ins and outs of formulation development and going, you know what? I can take this and start making my own skincare, which is exactly what I was doing, or exactly what I did. So way back in 2008, I started making my own skincare by implementing what I was learning from pesticide formulation of all things. And it was actually working. Little kind of a side note, maybe a fun fact. I launched a skincare business way back then in 2010 because, it took a couple of years for me to really trust the products that I was making, have good stability data on them, all of the things, and launched a skincare company in 2010 and started selling at local farmers markets. And that was the same year that I got my first job in pharmaceutical formulation development. The company that I started working for had a topical division, was using some of the same suppliers that I was using, even though drastically different ingredients, still some of the same suppliers. And my husband and I had a discussion and decided to table the skincare for, due to any perceived conflict of interest, even though I wasn't working in the topicals, I was working in the ingestibles division. And then fast forward to 2016, when I left that company and picked the skincare right back up. And by then I'd learned so much more. There were a whole plethora of greener ingredients, cleaner ingredients. I reformulated everything and then launched Organica in 2020 amidst COVID. So that's the story of Organica. And meanwhile, on my own health front, this was at this time, so we're kind of jumping ahead decades. We're going to pick up kind of in 2016 when I started experiencing some really weird symptoms. I, for the first time ever, started gaining weight. My appetite plummeted. I was basically forcing myself to eat 3 meals a day, even though I wasn't hungry, and I was gaining weight. And I also, for whatever reason, I had a rash breakout on both shins. And we could get into imposter syndrome. It is strong with this one. And it was especially strong with me that about a decade ago now, for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what to put on this rash to make it go away. And I was also visiting doctor after doctor. These were 2 of the symptoms I was experiencing. Also had several others. And I was suspecting that there was a thyroid problem. And I kept going to doctor after doctor, explaining the symptoms, showing them this weird rash, and kept getting tested for basic thyroid panel. These doctors were actually testing beyond just TSH. They were also testing T3 and T4, and everything was coming back in range. And finally, 2 years later, in 2018, I found a doctor who said, to really rule out a thyroid problem, you actually have to test anti-thyroid antibodies. And he was the first person to order the 2 anti-thyroid antibody tests that I needed. Lo and behold,
And just to get
one of those,
a little clarity on that one, that test panel would show if your body is attacking your thyroid?
It would, yes.
Okay. Sorry,
yes.
just so everyone understands what the difference is. One is testing if your thyroid works and is producing enough of its hormone on its own. And those panels were coming back within range for you.
Well, this is where it gets really nuanced. You can have sufficient thyroid hormone levels circulating in the bloodstream and be severely hypothyroid at the cellular level because there's no thyroid hormone uptake from the bloodstream. And to really rule out an autoimmune thyroid condition, you must test at a minimum these two thyroid antibodies to your point, to see whether or not the body is attacking thyroid tissue. And one of those that is consistent with Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune low thyroid, was Skyfly. And that's how I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I was put on a low dose of thyroxine, which is the thyroid makes two thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. There's actually some other ones, but for the sake of this conversation, we're going to limit it to T3 and T4. Most of the time, people are placed on T4 only as replacement hormone. I was placed on a very low dose, and that rash omission that had been consistent for 2 years went away.
Wow.
And this was the first realization for me that the skin is really a reflection of our soul. And that was part of what changed trajectory for more of a deep dive into what all of these other facets of our being, and a lot of time even diseases that we are diagnosed with, that at the end of the day are actually indications of metabolic dysregulation. So over the past 5 years, the list of symptoms that I have faced, because that replacement dose of thyroid hormone really was insufficient. And I was under-medicated for several years. And during that time, I had other symptoms pop up. I also stopped hormonal birth control, which when that happened, it was basically like entering menopause overnight because my body had been used to synthetic estrogen, like covering up everything. And so basically overnight, I developed insomnia, fatigue, night sweats, day sweats, foam sweats, which I didn't even know was a thing, migraines. For the first time in my life, I was struggling with headaches. And I mean, we are talking debilitating headaches where by the end of the day, one eye is watering, and I mean, just absolutely miserable. It was difficult. When we're talking brain fog, on those days with the headache, it was difficult to string together a coherent sentence. And this is something that's really tough for a research scientist going into work. I need to be able to talk. And then that wasn't even the worst of it. At one point, I thought I was developing early dementia. Vividly, one of the things that stands out in my mind is the day I got home from work, walked into the house and my dogs were missing. And I'm talking to my husband in a panic going, where are they? And he's like, you took them into daycare this morning. And I had forgotten to pick them up.
Oh my gosh.
And then,
so scary.
Yes. Incredibly scary. And then worst of worst, like while all that was going on, I was also experiencing urinary urgency and all of the symptoms, like all of the hallmark symptoms of UTI. I chased UTI symptoms for 18 months and also fell down a rabbit hole with that of seeing practitioner after practitioner, chasing microinfections, the whole thing. And this practitioner at the end of that 18 months, still chasing these infections, a practitioner handed me a script for a 28-day supply of an antibiotic so powerful, I was convinced it would kill me before I was done with the 28 days. And it was the same one that I already complained to her about having liver pain from. She handed me that. And it was like, in that moment, I heard that still small voice say, you realize you're practicing the definition of insanity. And it was like the universe knew that's what I needed to like shake me to my core to step on the path and be like, yeah, you know what? I've got this. I'm actually going to listen to my intuition, which is I'd suspected that I was insulin resistant now that I'd stopped hormonal birth control. made the changes that I knew of to support insulin sensitivity, restoring insulin sensitivity. And within a week, we're talking like 75% better. Some of these symptoms were completely gone. Like my pee was back to clear and cloudy. It was smelling like pee instead of that sickeningly sweet acetone smell. It wasn't burning when I was peeing. There was still urgency, but that was so much better than it had been previous week. And then this really set me into this whole cascade of investigating hormones that are specifically related to metabolism. And over the years, this took several years to piece together the connection between thyroid, insulin, and cortisol and metabolic health, metabolic function. And this goes right hand in hand with mitochondrial function within our cells. So our ability, our body's ability to generate energy and enough energy to get through the day. And then kind of after I thought I figured everything out, I wound up having a relapse after a really, I don't quite even know how to phrase this, like an extreme emotional stressor. And I had a relapse of symptoms. And that's when I realized that there's something above even this hormone piece. At the end of the day, the state of our nervous system and nervous system regulation is what informs the state of our hormones and whether or not those are balanced or not. And really, as long as our nervous system is well regulated, then we have good hormone control, then we have good metabolic health, then our body's able to meet energy demands. Otherwise, things just go really haywire. And that's kind of the minute I decided I knew I had to incorporate nervous system regulation into how I was working with women. So that's a very long-winded answer on how we got here.
That is such a beautiful journey. And I'm glad that I was like, I'm just going to let her go with this story. I have nothing to add. But it shows so many things as you're talking. I recognize like the entrepreneurial experience. It usually is there's something, a trigger in your own life that causes you to go on this search. How are you going to solve this problem, this thing? And sometimes that results in a product, in a personal transformation, in a new business, whatever. But it's never a straight line. You don't just like, well, I guess few people wake up one day and say, I'm going to start this business out of the blue. And these are just the things that I'm going to do. So I love seeing the weaving between your personal life, your health, your experiences from another work life, and how they all kind of braid together to make, I mean, when people talk about the difference, I guess, between like work and life, for me, they're so enmeshed. And I think for you as well, then like there's no difference. What I do for work is who I am as a person, and I do it because that's how I live my life. And I also enjoy education and teaching others. So that's just what I do across everything that I do. And you had this journey of illness and, the lack of support or information or resources that we get when we go see a traditional doctor or someone who's trained to kind of check the boxes. And I love that you took action. I love that you followed your intuition. I love that you took action on it. And now here you are with so much information and experience blended together into beautiful skincare products that are clean, that support your hormones, the ritual aspect that supports your nervous system. And I just think it's so cool. It's such an awesome journey to hear about.
Yeah. And it really feels like things have come full circle because with Rain Organica, really the intention was to give women a skincare routine and skincare products where you can step out your door after applying, and you do not think about it again until bedtime. Because I know what it's like to step outside and be like, oh my gosh, is the thing that is on my face, is it photoreactive? Is it actually doing more harm than good? And rushing back in and washing my face and then not wearing anything. So the mindfulness piece and what you just said about, yes, really that ritual for the nervous system. And I think in all instances in life, anywhere that we have the ability to transform routine into ritual, we are helping to our nervous system to switch more easily between that fight or flight response and the rest, digest, repair response. And even the act of making a tea or a coffee or applying your skincare really should allow the opportunity to elevate it to ritual.
I love that. And I I think I grew up always with the understanding that your skin is an organ and a very important one. And so, also being a child of the 80s, like nobody talked about green anything. Like, people barely even talked about vegetables back in the day. So your options were like Clearasil, Noxzema, like it's all 100% chemical. And I was always the teenager who was like, I'm going to use coconut oil to take off of my, I love natural products, and I just kind of experimented with stuff that felt good for me. And same thing. I mean, I honestly use coconut oil probably for everything, like even in my hair. Uh, but I've always loved the I guess it is the ritual of like playing with makeup or playing with skincare, doing something that feel nurturing for your body. Also in the 80s, like you'd read a magazine and they're like, mash up an avocado with honey and stick it on your face. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do today. But I love that because it feels, you have the connection to the natural world, and also you're taking time to prepare something and you're putting something that feels nourishing on this very important, very large external facing organ of ours. And I think a lot of times people don't understand that your skin's not just like this magical barrier between your insides and the outside world. It is a living, breathing organism, and it is a reflection of your overall health. Whether that's, aging skin, or if you're flushed because you have a fever, like your skin really shows what's going on your insides. Both my husband and our middle son had like hormonal acne. So the kind that's massive and eruptive and painful and embarrassing. And I remember I did not, as a teenager, I mean, I don't know how I was like shoving coconut oil on my face, avocados and things. Maybe that saved me. But Chad tells me stories about what it felt like to be a teenager and like how embarrassed he was and how self conscious. And when you see him now as an adult, those are not qualities of his personality that you would assume that he had. He's very vivacious, he's very outgoing, very confident, very self confident. So to hear him talk about being like feeling so awful in his own body because of acne, uh, or like he would realize that his face would start bleeding, or, he would have to put makeup on to try and cover it up, which then was making it worse. And same, the classic prescription for cystic acne, what is always, or is it not retinol, the other one? Accutane.
Yeah, Accutane. Yeah.
And then the crazy impact that had on him, like severely dry and cracking skin, just not great. And then when he saw our son starting to go through the same thing, it was like, oh no, we have to find a solution for this before it gets any worse. And you could see like his childhood trauma coming through that. And it's very interesting to watch someone go through. I've had not acne, but when I hear you talk about menopause symptoms or what happens when your estrogen gets out of balance later on in life, coupled with, I think I'm pretty self aware and I understand how to care for myself to a reasonable level. But also, when you go through an extended period of stress, like decades of very high stress, and you are a high functioning person, I think it's very easy to not see that. It was easy for me not to see it in myself. And so I had migraines. I had migraines that blinded me while I was driving alone on a freeway. Imagine how terrifying that is to fully lose your vision because of a headache so bad. I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, just take my foot off the gas pedal slowly and hope that this comes back. Had to get, MRIs to make sure that I didn't have a brain tumor, to make sure that there wasn't a tumor growing behind my eyeballs. And it came back with just, this is a symptom of a migraine. And then your hair starts to fall out, and that's just something. Or you start to gain 5 pounds every year, and it's like, well, you're getting older. It's fine. These things happen. And on and on and on. Like, I haven't slept through the night in over a decade. I would sleep on average maybe 3 or 4 hours every night. Um, I was hot to the point where I would have ice packs sitting on my face while my family was like, can we please turn the air conditioner off because we are freezing? I was like, nope, no can do. Sorry. You're all going to have to put on clothes because I can't cool down. I took a thermometer with me everywhere for years because I was like, I on the inside feel like I'm 150 degrees. And then I would take my temp and it was like 97 point something. And I was like, nobody pieces together that all of these things could be related until, you meet one magical person or you come across a bit of research and you finally have that aha moment. So for me, working with an acupuncturist on hormones specifically to get that balance to where I at least stopped gaining more weight, my hair stopped falling out. It helped with the hot flashes and with the migraines. Absolutely. I haven't had a migraine, thank goodness, in a very long time. But then I started digging deeper as you did and was like, how do I just fully reset like the cortisol levels? Like I have been living in fight mode without a break for way too long. And if you can't sleep, if your body just literally can't ever come back down, that's going to cause you a whole host of other problems. So I did like absolutely no sugar, no artificial ingredients in my foods, nothing other than like very clean, lean proteins, lots of clean veggies, fruits, and that's it for months. And the difference was incredible. Like within a week, I could sleep all the way through the night for like, I slept for 9 hours. So I was going to bed at like 8 p.m. and waking up at 5. I was like, this is life changing. And I think that was like the last piece that I needed was my stress level was so high and the cortisol level so high that then I was craving more and more sugar. And without having a sweet tooth, I was like, okay, I'll have a glass of wine or I'll eat more fruit or like I'll snack on some kind of packaged food. Uh, and then it's just this vicious cycle. So eliminating all of that, I did that this year. And I was like, wow. I mean, not only did I lose weight, but I'm still sleeping really well through the night. I've had zero heat in my body, like not that trapped feeling of heat. And even though like I've incorporated, I think I had like Ritz crackers yesterday, like stuff that has additives in it, I still feel really good. So that's been my journey with trying a non-chemical way of rebalancing hormones and trying to find some relief.
Yes. And so I love what you shared both about your husband's experience. I mean, it's really amazing how something that happens when we're a teenager, even if we have moved past it and, appear fine to the outside world, how much that really impacted us, like our psyche, how ultimately even how we show up in the world, because at some level, like there's still that teenager who doesn't want to be seen within. And there's been a lot of deconditioning for me from that. And then I love what you shared about your own path to really re-regulating, achieving regulated cortisol rhythm. This is like what I have learned is that for so many of us, you tell us to breathe, you tell us to meditate, and it doesn't work. It does absolutely nothing to help us switch from that fight or flight path over into rest digest. And it's because, just like you said, we have been running fight or flight for so long, for so many decades, that it's almost as if now there's this gorge carved in that stream, or this gorge carved, and the river's running way down at the bottom of it. And to even figure out, for the nervous system and the mind and the body to figure out how to get out of this and back over into rest, digest, repair, we've got two options. We have to raise the level of that river so that now it can find its way over and start carving these new neural pathways to make that transition a lot easier. Or we have to, at the bottom here in the trenches, figure out how to do it and how to carve over. Working with an acupuncturist, like, that's beautiful, because they really are taking this very Eastern way of seeing the body, and it's seeing these heat. It's in, like what you were saying, where you've got this internal heat, but it's not able to get out and able to express itself, and really transform, like working with that and transforming it. And for me, Spinal Flow, really these light touch chiropractic modalities, or these light touch modalities that are rooted in chiropractic science, they were the first thing that ever worked like that for me. I used acupuncture myself as a crutch to avoid gallbladder surgery, gallbladder removal for years, which, looking back on that, when the gallbladder is acting up and struggling to process, well, really struggling with bile flow, it's an indication that we are locked in fight or flight. But I didn't know it then, or I could have potentially shaved 10 years off my journey and still have a gallbladder today. But acupuncture helped me to keep my gallbladder and kind of manage symptoms for 2 years after it was diagnosed as a sludgy gallbladder. For me, though, these hands-on techniques, when I first went in the very first time and practitioner laid hands on me, it was like I felt my body just begin to unwind. And it has done more than anything else for changing really how I show up in the world. It's done more for changing how I show up in business, just every aspect of my being, in addition to the health piece, and really helped to shift my perspective from seeing the world. Even though I have not been purely Western medicine and Western and science for a long time, I was still pretty entrenched in that. And this has just opened up the door for really, I feel like, better understanding what's really going on and why we're here.
So Spinal Flow, you did a beautiful workshop in our space where you administered Spinal Flow, or hosted, I don't know what the right terminology is for that, but you were the leader of the Spinal Flow experience for a few women in our shop. And that was my first experience with it. And would you call it like an energy modality? Or I like light touch. I feel like that's very specific, because it's not like Reiki where you're sort of hands off and it's all energy.
Yeah. So I call it hands-on nervous system regulation work. The more that there are several of these light touch modalities, and the more that I research these and kind of understand the history, kind of how they came to be, it's really fascinating how chiropractors even view the world, because they believe, like the chiropractic belief is that nerve flow is as essential to health as blood flow. And anywhere that we have resistance, like anywhere in the body, resistance to that nerve impulse reaching the tissues and the organs that it feeds, then we're more likely to develop symptoms, more likely to develop disease states. And, just reading some of the works of a few of these chiropractors who've developed other ones of these light touch modalities, it's beautiful, their description of the nervous system itself, and almost being like, it really is according to them, it really is the plug. Like, this is the the nervous system is the part of you that is plugged into source energy. And we come into this world, of course, as pure source energy and unconditioned. And then we have all of this conditioning layered on top of it. And expectations are set from a very, very young age, actually even in utero. And so it's what our tolerance is for an extraordinary life is already set and already predetermined. And we kind of just put up with the world as it is because of all of this conditioning. And that's just like to what you described, Elsa, speaks so much of the path that like this is almost universal for women and men. Women feel like get the brunt of this because there are so many hormonal shifts throughout our lives that change how our cortisol rhythm and change whether or not we are, because ultimately it is this loop. Cortisol can go out of whack and cause nervous system dysregulation, or nervous system can become dysregulated and cause cortisol to go out of whack. So regardless, just because we have all of these shifts, we have onset of like menarche, we have throughout our reproductive years, if we get pregnant, give birth, all of this, we have so many changes in the way that our body handles like just our metabolism and our cortisol response to that we tend to be the ones that are showing up in doctors' offices more, and they won't listen. Like you received feedback when you were having migraines, even and especially the weight gain, the 5-pound weight gain year over year, that is not normal. It is not acceptable. That is not something we should have to be put up with, that we should have to put up with as you have to accept it. That is complete BS. And so many of us are told that. And just like your hair falling out, no, we should not have to accept our hair falling out. That is a symptom, once again, of this dysregulated cortisol rhythm.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't have to
be
accept
clear,
that.
when I say hair falling out, I don't mean like a few I mean like you touch your hair and I would have a handful of hair in my hands. So, just I don't want people to be like, okay, you lost a few hairs. I'm like, no, like a terrifying amount.
Yes. I have been there as well with the hair falling out. It was so far down the list. It didn't even
Yeah.
It is ridiculous though that that our society is set up to inform us that is normal. And because then it leaves us questioning, well, first of all, questioning our own intuition, which is always a really dangerous spot to be in, because at the end of the day, like that is the source of truth. Intuition is the source of truth. Like those are downloads from the divine. And it just leads back into like the societal norms and cultural norms for, okay, this is the best you can expect.
Yeah, which is sad is the first word that comes to mind. I don't think that as a society we should be teaching people to kind of strive for mediocre or less than mediocre, especially not when it comes to your own health and well-being. I don't know if it was just something like inherent in me or the way that our parents raised us. My dad studied Western medicine, so is well versed in that. But we kind of were never raised with like medication being the answer. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful to have the respect for science and modern medicine as it's necessary, but coupled with an understanding that your body is infinitely wise and so much more complex and so much more intelligent than we even understand or that research can even show us. And being given, I guess, like the permission from my parents at a young age to make those decisions for your own body and to kind of like let your body take the lead versus always medicate the symptoms until you kind of go back to feeling mediocre again. And so that interest has only grown in me in adulthood. And now I love like all things very witchy, I'm like, "Ooh, what can I grow in the garden so I can make like a tea or make a tincture, a little elixir?" And my first inclination in healing anything is always like there has to be something that my body is already capable of doing and I can support it, or there has to be something that from the natural world that can help me feel better, whether it's by taking it or not taking it. I think a perfect example of this is like fever. People are so terrified to have a fever, but really that's your body's very smart, very wise pathway to killing off any sort of an infection inside your body. But our impulse is to take medication to remove the fever, which is the very thing that would help you actually feel better or fight that illness. Of course, take all of like, I'm not talking about extremes here. If you have a fever of 105, by all means, like go to the emergency room. But a low grade fever, like these things, when they come up, especially like, we have two teenagers at home, they might have a 100-degree temperature. And it's like, okay, well, did you drink enough water today? Did you have football practice outside in pads and it was 105 degrees? Could you be coming down with a cold? But like, does any of this warrant medication to the level of suppressing your body's own immune response? And this is always the debate in our house.
Well, I think it's a beautiful debate to have. And it's so interesting, your upbringing versus my upbringing. My mom is a nurse, and it was very much kind of give your power away to the doctors because they know better. And very much, okay, what can we take for this pain or this fever or whatever it may be? So it took some years to shed that. And I am so glad that I am where I am now because yes, I think that we're given these, like our bodies are always talking to us, and just tuning in is so informative and helps to process whatever it is that needs to be processed so that we can, show up wholly as ourselves.
I love that. That's a beautiful way of phrasing it. How can people support what it is that you're doing, learn more about what you're doing? I know you're doing Spinal Flow now, which has been so healing for you, and I found it to be very restorative, even just with that one session. And you're down in the San Diego area.
I am. I practice in Encinitas, and I
I
offer
love that
in
town.
person with the Spinal Flow, as you mentioned, and also virtual support, especially for anybody that is basically, if you've reached the end of your rope and you feel like you're in the position where you have no idea where to turn next because you've already exhausted everything, I'm for those people. Specifically, I work with people who are struggling with MCAS, so mast cell activation syndrome, interstitial cystitis. This combines interstitial cystitis, urinary urgency, overactive bladder, all of those, and Hashimoto's. Oftentimes with Hashimoto's, once again, people are put on T4 replacement therapy, and if their cortisol's out of rhythm, what winds up happening is they still have all of the symptoms because we're not addressing the root of the problem.
Wow. And so Spinal Flow, you are finding to be helpful with all of those things.
Yes. And what I will typically do for people that are further out is I will do one-on-one coaching with them to address. Basically, it's to what we want to do is most of these people, they're walking a tightrope, and one misstep and they're falling off a cliff. And what we're working to do is build back in resilience so that we can start shifting those guardrails further and further out. So they've got more room just to live. And as beautiful as Spinal Flow and any of these hands-on nervous system regulation techniques are, for the short term, most of the time, it's not enough. And we are needing to incorporate dietary changes a lot of times, lifestyle changes, exercise modifications in order to help get that resilience to just getting through the day.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. And then, of course, you have your Rain Organica line, which you sell on your website. So, Rain Organica, people can find on your website. We'll include, of course, all the details in the show notes. So that's really easy for people to find. And you have a pretty robust skincare line, but all intended to be simplified, so it's not one of these 25-step things. It's a very easy, very clean, very beautifully packaged ritual for total skincare, which is wonderful. Who doesn't love that? Sometimes I'm 0 steps or less. I have like nailed the morning routine, but I have never in my life been able to stick to an evening routine. So whatever happens to my skin during the day just sort of endures until the next morning, usually. And I think I must just be extremely blessed to have very tolerant of my behavior skin because I mean, I feel like it still looks reasonably healthy. But yeah, that's one of my lifelong goals is to actually develop a nighttime skin routine that I can stick to because I also love that ritual of now we're winding down. I love the symbolism of like we're removing the day from our face, from our skin. You're brushing your teeth, you're doing all of these things. So I'm working on it. I guarantee you, I never will have a 25-step care routine. I don't have the bathroom space. I don't have the patience. Well, thank you very much for sharing a small part of your journey with me today. I just think that your story, how you've come to be where you are today, is so beautiful and so resilient. And I'm always so inspired hearing you talk about everything that you've struggled with and how you were able to take action. And now you're helping so many other people with your products, with your coaching, with Spinal Flow now. I think it's just so wonderful. I'm so happy that we were introduced.